The dusty harmattan wind drifted through the streets of Benin City as Christmas approached, casting a hazy chill over the festive season. Eleanor and her boyfriend, Richie, walked quietly toward the main road. To steal this moment with him, she had lied to her father, claiming she was too unwell to attend church. If only she had known what lay ahead, she never would have abused her father's trust. After seeing Richie off at the bus stop, Eleanor turned back, beginning the lonely walk home. That was when she ran into them, a group of notorious street thugs blocking her path. Not far behind them, Chineser was walking down the same street, driven by a simple, nagging hunger to find something to eat. For most people, Christmas was a season of joy. For Chineser, it was just another period of survival. Very few people in Benin City knew his real name. To the streets, he was simply China. Some called him dangerous. Some called him a thug, a criminal, a menace. Others simply crossed the road the moment they saw his shadow approaching. China had long stopped caring about the whispers. Life had taught him a harsh lesson early on. Reputation often arrives long before the truth. He hadn't always been a product of the Benin City slums. He was born in a quiet, small town in Anambra State. His father had been a hard-working carpenter, and his mother sold vegetables at the local market. They were poor, but they were content because they had each other. Then tragedy tore his world apart. His father passed away after a brief, sudden illness. Less than a year later, his mother succumbed to a severe septic infection from an injury she sustained while working on the farm. China was only 10 years old when his parents died. When the relatives gathered for the burial, they spoke kindly and promised to care for him. One uncle volunteered to bring him to Benin City, assuring everyone that the boy would be raised properly. For the first few months things seemed fine. Then the complaints began. China ate too much. China asked too many questions. China was becoming a burden. One evening, after a heated disagreement, his uncle's new wife shouted the words that changed everything. "You are an evil child. Don't kill us the way you killed your parents." That very night, while his uncle was away for business, he was thrown out. Just like that, with no money, no home, and no future. The streets became his teacher, the markets his shelter, and the city his family. He learned quickly how to avoid trouble, how to recognize danger, how to sleep with one eye open, and ultimately how to survive. Inevitably, people noticed him. They saw him fighting, defending himself, and running with street boys. Soon rumors began to spread. China had become this. China had done that. Some stories were true, but most were not. Yet, nobody cared about the difference. Fear always spreads faster than facts. By the age of 20, China had become a name people whispered. Mothers warned their children, fathers shook their heads, and shop owners watched him with guarded eyes. Yet beneath that rough, calloused exterior remained a young man who still remembered his mother's prayers. A young man who believed, somewhere deep inside, that life could still be different. Eleanor's footsteps slowed as the street narrowed ahead. The group of thugs blocked the footpath completely now. 4 of them, leaning casually against a rusted kiosk like they owned the air itself. One of them kicked at a plastic bottle, watching it skid toward her feet. One of them called out. Another whistled. She kept walking. And they walked behind her. Their comments became louder, cruder, more aggressive. Eleanor increased her pace. Suddenly, one of them stepped forward and grabbed her wrist. Fear shot through her body. "Leave me alone." She tried pulling away. The others surrounded her. Her heart pounded violently. She screamed. Nobody answered. One of the boys slapped a hand over her mouth. Another grabbed her legs. Within seconds they were carrying her away. Panic overwhelmed her. She kicked, struggled, tried to scream again. Then a voice thundered from behind. "Drop her." The boys froze. Every one of them recognized that voice. China. He was running toward them. Anger burned in his eyes. The leader cursed. The boys dropped Eleanor and prepared to fight. China didn't slow down. The first punch landed before anyone could react. The second attacker stumbled backward. A third received a kick that sent him crashing into a roadside gutter. The others suddenly lost their courage. They scattered, running in different directions. One snatched Eleanor's phone before escaping. China chased them. The pursuit lasted several streets. But he lost them. By the time he returned, Eleanor was gone. Back at home, she lay on her bed and cried. "I am safe now," she told herself repeatedly. For a moment, she stared blankly at the ceiling. That was the notorious China, the most feared thug on the streets. Yet he had rescued her. He had protected her virtue, speaking only a few words and demanding absolutely nothing in return. She was supposed to have been at church that day. Instead, she had lied to stay behind, all for a chance to see her boyfriend Richie. Overwhelmed by guilt and gratitude, Eleanor wept. In that quiet, broken moment, she surrendered her life to Christ fully, stripping away all pretense. If she was honest with herself, God was offering her a second chance, and she would be a fool to throw it away. 3 days later, Christmas Day arrived. Pastor Gregory's home overflowed with warmth and visitors. Relatives drifted in and out, the laughter of children echoed through the halls, and festive music filled the air. Then a sudden knock sounded at the gate. When Pastor Gregory opened the door, he found China standing on the threshold, holding a phone. "I believe this belongs to your daughter," China said smoothly. The pastor studied the young man carefully. He knew exactly who China was. Rumors of his violent reputation preceded him everywhere. What business, he wondered, could this criminal possibly have with his daughter? Before he could demand answers, Eleanor appeared. Her eyes widened, a turbulent mix of fear and gratitude washing over her. She hadn't told her father a single word about the incident. Now, misinterpreting the situation, her father began aggressively questioning China as if he had stolen the device. Yet, China remained stoically silent, enduring the accusations just to protect her secret. Unable to stand by while China was falsely accused, Eleanor spoke up. She explained everything. The lie about being ill just to stay home. Her boyfriend escorting her. The sudden attack. The rescue. The loss of her phone. A heavy silence filled the room. China stared at Eleanor as she confessed. Seeing her innocence and realizing she was putting herself on the line just to save him from her father's wrath, touched him deeply. He found himself memorizing her facial features. It was the shape of her lips that would stay with him the longest, full, pinkish, and shaped like a heart. Right now they quivered with fear and threatened tears. He had only seen her a few times before when she came to the market with her mother. She was always perfectly put together, clearly made for great things. She wasn't like the girls who usually threw themselves at him. She was special. That was exactly why he had gone the extra mile to retrieve her phone. He had just wanted to do something for her. "She will never look your way. Both of you are worlds apart," a voice whispered in his head. China looked away. Yeah, they were worlds apart. Suddenly, Pastor Gregory stepped forward. This boy, whose destiny everyone in the community considered to be utterly destroyed, had just saved his daughter's virtue. Overwhelmed as a father, the pastor looked at China, completely undone by the fact that this outsider had stepped in to protect his only daughter. Moved by the significance of China's actions, the pastor placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "China, I have nothing with which to repay you. But such as I do have, I will give." Then he began to pray. The prayer was unlike anything China had ever heard. "Lord, before this young man even knows he needs help, send help ahead of him." China blinked, listening intently. The pastor continued, his voice steady and fervent. "When danger approaches him, let your mercy arrive first. When opportunities exist, let favor find him before he even starts searching. When doors are closed, send someone to open them. When he feels forgotten, remind him that heaven sees him. And one day, let him become the man you created him to be." Tears welled up in China's eyes. Nobody had ever prayed for him like that. Nobody. Not even his own relatives. He left that Christmas carrying something entirely new: hope. And hope changes people. Within months, the prayer began working in ways nobody could explain. One afternoon, China found himself in a brawl at a burial ceremony. That was just his way. If you looked for his trouble, he gave you trouble. The event was no ordinary funeral. Chief Clifford Igbinosa, a man of immense wealth and influence, was burying his late father. When someone in the crowd picked on China, a fight broke out, completely disrupting the high-profile ceremony. When the security guards hauled China before the wealthy man, the crowd hushed, expecting the worst. Chief Igbinosa listened to the details of the fracas, but instead of growing angry, he found himself quietly amused by China's raw audacity. The chief looked China up and down. Anyone else would have had the boy thrown out or handed over to the authorities for disrupting a burial of that magnitude. But the prayer was already at work. "You have liver," Chief Igbinosa said, a slow smile breaking across his face. "You disrupt my father's burial just because someone looked for your trouble? You don't fear." "I don't look for trouble, Chief," China said. His chest was still heaving from the scuffle, but his voice was steady. "But I don't run from it either." Instead of ordering his security to teach China a lesson, the wealthy man chuckled, a sound that instantly shattered the tension in the air. He saw something rare in China, a raw, fierce courage and an unyielding spirit that, if properly channeled, could be incredibly valuable. When opportunities exist, let favor find him before he starts searching. The pastor's words echoed in the spiritual realm as the chief spoke again. I like your spirit, boy. But rascality without purpose will only land you in a grave or a prison cell. I need people with your kind of fire, but it must be controlled. Chief Igbinosa reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card and tossed it to China. Come to my office on Monday morning. Let's see if we can turn that trouble into something useful. When China walked out of the compound, the adrenaline of the fight had faded, replaced by a profound sense of awe. He looked down at the card in his hand. He hadn't searched for this opportunity. He had literally fought his way into it, yet favor had been waiting for him all along. The pastor was right. Heaven was watching, and China's life was never going to be the same again. Weeks later, he summoned China and offered him something unexpected, a scholarship and an opportunity to study in the United Kingdom. China thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. The documents, the sponsorship, and the opportunity were all real. Before he even knew he needed help, it had arrived, exactly as Pastor Gregory had prayed. Years passed and China studied relentlessly. The transition was difficult, bringing a new culture, unfamiliar weather, and demanding expectations. On many nights he considered giving up. Yet, whenever problems arose, someone always appeared. A lecturer offered guidance, a friend provided support, or a mentor opened a door. Again and again the prayer followed him. After university he joined the military. The discipline transformed him. The angry street boys slowly disappeared, and a responsible man emerged. Eventually he left military service and entered the business world. The early years were brutal. He lost money, made mistakes, and trusted the wrong people. Yet, every setback somehow became a stepping stone. One failed investment introduced him to a future business partner, one disappointing meeting connected him with a major client, and one closed door led to a larger opportunity. Then came the greatest transformation. He met Christ. It was not a matter of religion or tradition, but a genuine encounter with Christ. The experience changed everything. For the first time he understood grace, forgiveness, and purpose. The bitterness he had carried since childhood began to fade. Years later he established several successful companies, one of which became a major logistics enterprise. People respected him. Employees admired him. Investors trusted him. The street boy called China had become a remarkable man. Yet every Christmas he remembered Pastor Gregory's prayer, a seed planted that changed his life for good, and the bright-eyed girl God used him to save. Every Christmas, without fail. 12 years passed. Christmas approached once again. The city of Benin was decorated with lights, churches rehearsed Christmas carols, families planned reunions, and children counted the days until Christmas morning. And while all this was happening, Eleanor Osagie was fighting the greatest battle of her life. At 31 years old, Eleanor had become a respected professional. She worked in the Benin branch of a rapidly growing logistics company known throughout Nigeria and beyond. Its owner was rarely seen. Employees spoke of him almost like a legend. Some said he had once served in the military. Others said he started with nothing. Many knew he spent much of his time overseas managing various business interests. Eleanor had never met him. She simply knew him as the CEO. Her immediate superior was the branch manager. At first he appeared friendly, professional, and helpful. Over time his friendliness changed. He began inviting her to dinner. She politely declined. He asked again. She declined again. The invitations continued and so did the refusals. The manager's smile slowly disappeared. His attitude became colder, meetings became uncomfortable, criticism increased, and tasks became unnecessarily difficult. Eleanor understood what was happening. She prayed about it, remained professional, and continued doing her work. Unfortunately, the rejection had wounded the manager's pride, and wounded pride can become dangerous. One evening he sat alone in his office. His bitterness had grown into something darker. If Eleanor would not accept him, she would pay for humiliating him. The scheme he designed was elaborate, careful, and cruel. Over several weeks, forged documents appeared within the company records. Signatures were copied, emails were manipulated, and financial reports were altered. By the time the process was complete, the evidence seemed overwhelming. The documents suggested that Eleanor had secretly worked with rival investors to manipulate company shares, a serious accusation that could destroy a career and possibly even lead to prison. The investigation began quietly, then suddenly exploded into public view. Eleanor was summoned before a disciplinary panel. When she saw the documents, her blood ran cold. The emails appeared authentic, and the evidence seemed impossible to challenge. "I didn't do this," she said repeatedly. but nobody appeared convinced. For the first time in years, fear gripped her heart. Every night she knelt beside her bed, praying, crying, and seeking God. Her parents prayed with her, and Pastor Gregory assured her that the truth would prevail, but even he worried. The evidence was powerful. The hearing date arrived, December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. Eleanor entered the conference room with the uneasy sense that she was stepping into a courtroom. A long table had been set at the front of the room. Several members of a disciplinary panel sat behind it, with neatly arranged files and document folders in front of them. Legal representatives were present. The atmosphere was formal, controlled, and tense. The branch manager sat on the opposite side, composed and self-assured, his expression carrying quiet confidence, almost certainty. The proceedings began immediately. One allegation after another was read into the record. Supporting documents were submitted. Witnesses were called and questioned. Responses were recorded. The process was methodical and exhaustive. As the hours passed, Eleanor's initial composure began to weaken. The volume of evidence, whether accurate or not, created a picture that appeared increasingly difficult to defend against. The environment felt weighted in favor of the opposition. Then the door opened. A man entered. The room changed instantly. Conversation stopped. Chairs moved back as people stood in respect. Even members of the panel rose to their feet. Eleanor noticed the shift immediately. It was not routine courtesy, it was deference. The man acknowledged the room with a slight nod and took a seat without ceremony. The chair of the panel cleared his throat. "Sir, we were not expecting your attendance." The man replied calmly, "I was in the area conducting inspections." "Please proceed." Eleanor studied him carefully. Something about him felt unsettlingly familiar, though she could not place where she had seen him before. The hearing resumed. After the final submissions, the chair summarized the matter and turned toward the man. "As Chief Executive Officer, the final recommendation rests with you." Eleanor's breath caught. Gio. So this was him, the founder. The man reviewed the documents in silence. His expression remained controlled and unreadable as he turned each page. Then his gaze lifted and settled on Eleanor. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Something flickered across his face, recognition, restrained emotion, and something deeper that he quickly concealed. He continued reading. But internally his thoughts had shifted. He knew her. Not as a case file. Not as an employee under investigation. He recognized her as the frightened young girl he had once intervened to help more than a decade earlier, the daughter of Pastor Gregory, the man whose prayer had marked a turning point in his life. And now she sat before him accused. China maintained his composure. He asked questions, carefully, precisely, moving through the evidence without emotion. Each answer was noted. Each document examined. The room remained silent as he continued, methodical and deliberate, ensuring every detail was clear before any decision would be made. Then he spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence." The room fell completely silent. The branch manager's expression tightened into a confident smile. In his mind, the outcome was already secured. China continued, calm and measured. "However, I have identified several inconsistencies that require further investigation." The smile vanished. China leaned back slightly in his chair. "Until further notice, I am suspending all disciplinary proceedings in this matter." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Eleanor looked at him sharply as though she had misheard. He continued without pause. "Furthermore, Miss Eleanor will not remain in this branch." The manager's expression shifted again, this time toward quiet satisfaction. If she was being removed, then the case still leaned in his favor. Then China added, "She will be transferred to headquarters, where she will report directly to me." Silence. The kind that felt heavy enough to press against the walls. The manager's composure cracked for a moment. The chairman looked uncertain, glancing between the documents and the CEO, but no one spoke. The decision stood. The meeting was adjourned. The case, in practical terms, was paused indefinitely. As the attendees began to leave, Eleanor gathered herself and approached him. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. China gave a brief nod. "Report to headquarters next month." Nothing more. No further explanation. No reassurance. No visible sentiment. Yet Eleanor left the room feeling as though she had been pulled out of danger by an unseen hand. That evening she called her father and recounted everything. Pastor Gregory listened quietly, and when she finished, there was a long pause before emotion overcame him. He and his wife wept openly. Prayers they had long forgotten they had prayed now seemed to have found their answer in ways they could never have imagined. Her friend and colleague Jennifer struggled to process it all. "Do you know the CEO from somewhere?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. Eleanor only shook her head slowly. "Not that I know of." Headquarters was unlike anything she had experienced in the Benin branch. Everything was larger in scale, sharper in expectation, and faster in pace. The standards were exacting and the pressure was constant. Yet, surprisingly, she adapted quickly. And to her quiet astonishment, the CEO took a personal interest in her development. Not in a personal or inappropriate sense, but in a deliberate, professional, and unusually attentive way, assigning her challenging work, exposing her to high-level meetings, and ensuring she had access to resources far beyond her position. In a strictly professional manner, he challenged her work, refined her thinking, and pushed her beyond what she believed she was capable of. When she made mistakes, he corrected them directly but without humiliation. When she succeeded, he acknowledged it briefly, never excessive, never performative, but always precise and meaningful. Months passed in this rhythm. Gradually, the structure of their interaction changed. What had begun as formal reporting sessions evolved into extended discussions about strategy, operations, and leadership. Those discussions in turn became more personal conversations, still appropriate, still restrained, but no longer purely transactional. And over time, a quiet familiarity formed between them. One detail, however, continued to unsettle Eleanor. China often asked about her family. Not casually, but with a focused interest that felt deliberate. "How is Pastor Gregory doing? Do you keep in regular contact with them? And your father's health, how is it now?" She always found it unusual. Not inappropriate, but distinctly intentional. It was as if he carried an understanding of her family that went beyond professional courtesy. One afternoon, unable to ignore it any longer, she asked directly, "You seem to know a lot about my father." China's response came after a brief pause, accompanied by a calm, restrained smile. "He helped many people." Technically it was true. But it was not the full truth. As the months continued, Eleanor began noticing other things. The consistency of his character. The absence of ego. The way he treated everyone in the organization with the same baseline respect, whether a cleaner or a senior executive. The quiet discipline of his personal life. The fact that he often paused before major decisions, sometimes in prayer, sometimes in silence. He cared about Eleanor, more than he had planned to, more than he had allowed himself to admit, and perhaps more than he had ever intended since the day he first saw her again. After work he stopped by a pharmacy. He bought medication, then picked up light groceries and prepared food before driving to her apartment. When Eleanor opened the door, surprise crossed her face. "Sir?" China looked at her for a moment and gave a faint, almost relieved smile. "You look terrible." Despite her weakness, she let out a soft laugh. "You shouldn't have done this, sir." He stepped inside without making a spectacle of it, placing the items down carefully. Over the next hour, he prepared something simple for her to eat, ensured she took her medication, and checked that she was comfortable. There was nothing grand about it. Nothing that felt rehearsed or extraordinary. And yet the entire moment carried an ease neither of them expected. As if, for a brief stretch of time, titles had stopped mattering. When everything was finally settled, he stood near the door, reluctant in a way he did not express. "I should go," he said quietly. Neither of them moved immediately, because neither truly wanted the evening to end. The next day he returned in the evening. The Christmas holiday had officially begun, and the city outside had slowed into a softer rhythm. Less traffic, more music drifting through neighborhoods, the glow of seasonal lights reflecting off quiet streets. Eleanor wasn't expecting him. This time, China wasn't in formal attire. He wore simple, casual clothes, unremarkable at first glance, but strangely fitting on him in a way she hadn't seen before. It made him look less like a CEO and more like a man who could simply exist in a normal space without weight pressing on his shoulders. Eleanor was still recovering. The fever had broken, but weakness lingered. And although she didn't fully want company, she couldn't deny that his presence made things easier, especially the practical help he brought with him. Her sitting room told its own story: scattered tissue paper from a persistent runny nose, half-eaten pizza boxes, a cup of cold tea left untouched on the table. When she saw him take in the scene, a wave of embarrassment washed over her. Before she could say anything, China simply waved it off and began tidying up without comment. He moved with quiet efficiency, not making a point of it, not drawing attention to her discomfort. Eleanor slipped into her room, half to recover, half to avoid watching him. When she woke later, the apartment had changed. The sitting room was clean, organized, restored. and the air carried a warm, familiar scent. Fish pepper soup. You are awake, his voice came from the kitchen area. Eleanor stepped out slowly, still regaining her strength. He had finished cleaning, and now stood near the counter as though he had always belonged there. There is fish pepper soup, he said calmly. Let me serve you some. But she didn't move immediately. She stood there, studying him instead. Why are you doing all this? She asked quietly. China paused. For a moment, it looked as though he might deflect the question, return it to something safe, something neutral. But instead, he exhaled slightly and chose honesty. I like you, he said simply. You are different. You are special. Eleanor held his gaze. And if that makes things complicated, he added, shifting his weight slightly, I can stop. A small silence settled between them before she spoke again. We are both believers, she said. We have to define boundaries. I understand, he replied. I will not cross any line. Eleanor let out a short laugh, not unkind but sharp with clarity. I am not a virgin, she said plainly. And I find you attractive. Just as you find me. So we should be honest and help each other not to cross lines we shouldn't cross. For a moment, China just looked at her. Then he laughed quietly, almost in disbelief. You are blunt, he said. Very direct. Better to be blunt than be sorry, she replied. He nodded slightly. So, we need a chaperone? Yeah. He gave a faint smile. All right. The Holy Spirit will be our chaperone. But I will be on my best behavior. I have been celibate for 12 years. Eleanor blinked once, then shook her head lightly. Me too, she said. And right now, I am ready to eat that fish pepper soup. China smiled a little wider. Bon appetit. As the day progressed, their conversation deepened. They spoke about childhood, family, dreams, failures, faith. For the first time, Eleanor shared details she rarely discussed, including an event from 12 years earlier. The most memorable thing that happened to me was when I was 19. China remained silent, listening carefully. A group of boys tried to abduct me. China's heart skipped a beat. I remember being terrified. She smiled softly. Then someone appeared. China looked down. He fought them and rescued me. The room grew quiet. He was a street boy everyone feared, she continued. Most people thought he was dangerous. But that day he saved my life. China felt emotion rising within him. Eleanor stared thoughtfully into the distance. My father never forgot him. Not once. What do you mean? Every day my father prayed for him. China's eyes widened. Every day? She nodded. He always said God had a special plan for that young man. He prayed that wherever he was, God would protect him. He prayed that God would bless him. He prayed that God would bring him to Christ. A tear formed in the corner of China's eye. He quickly looked away. Eleanor didn't notice. Sometimes, she admitted quietly, I wonder what became of him. Silence settled between them. Neither realized how much that conversation would change everything. Because for the first time, China knew something important. She remembered. Not just the event. Not just the rescue. She remembered him. And she remembered him kindly. That realization removed a burden he had carried for years. On Christmas Day, China was back at Eleanor's house. 4 days, he had spent time in prayer and careful consideration. Finally, he asked Eleanor if she would allow him to court her. To his immense relief, she agreed. That Christmas became a memorable one for them. Music, food, movies, and laughter. They restricted themselves to the sitting room, determined to honor the boundaries they had set. From that day, their relationship developed slowly, deliberately. Neither wanted to rush. Both valued faith. Both valued family. Both understood the importance of building a strong foundation. The months that followed became some of the happiest of their lives. They attended church together, served together, prayed together, discussed their future together. The more time Eleanor spent with China, the more she admired him. His wealth impressed her the least. His character impressed her the most. Meanwhile, China found himself increasingly convinced that God had brought Eleanor back into his life for a reason. Not by accident. Not by coincidence. But by divine design. Yet one secret remained. He still had not revealed who he truly was. The longer he waited, the harder it became. Several times he almost told her. Several times fear stopped him. Eventually he decided there was only one solution. He would reveal everything. But he wanted to do it properly. He wanted her family to be present. And so he chose New Year's Day. The beginning of new things. A few days after Christmas, Eleanor traveled to Benin City to spend time with her parents. The familiar streets brought back memories. The old church. The neighborhood. The house where she had grown up. Everything felt wonderfully familiar. 2 days later, China arrived. He had informed the family beforehand that he intended to visit. Eleanor expected a pleasant evening. Nothing more. She had no idea her entire world was about to change. Pastor Gregory opened the front door. The moment he saw the visitor, he froze. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The years disappeared instantly. Pastor Gregory stared. China stared back. Then, slowly, a smile spread across the pastor's face. His eyes filled with tears. China. The name seemed to echo through the house. Eleanor looked from one man to the other. Confusion flooded her face. China lowered his head respectfully. "Good evening, sir." Pastor Gregory stepped forward. Then embraced him tightly. Like a father welcoming a son home. Eleanor stood motionless. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Finally, she found her voice. "Wait." She looked at China. Then at her father. Then back at China. No. Neither man answered. Eleanor's eyes widened. No. The realization struck like lightning. The rescue. The Christmas prayer. The mysterious interest in her father. The familiar feeling when she first saw him. Everything suddenly made sense. Her hand covered her mouth. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "You're him." China nodded. Slowly. Quietly. "I'm him." For a moment, nobody spoke. Eleanor felt overwhelmed by emotion. The man she loved. The man she planned to marry. The man who rescued her. The young street boy her father had prayed for all those years. They were all the same person. She laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. Pastor Gregory shook his head in amazement. "God is incredible." China finally spoke. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier." Eleanor wiped away her tears. "Why?" "I was afraid." "Afraid?" He nodded. "I wasn't sure how you would feel if you knew who I used to be." Pastor Gregory smiled. "My son." China looked up. The pastor rarely used those words. What matters is not who you were. What matters is who God made you become. Silence filled the room. Holy. Beautiful. Healing. Pastor Gregory continued. 12 years ago, everyone saw a street thug. But God saw a future. The word struck deeply. China could not hold back his tears any longer. Neither could Eleanor. That evening became a celebration. Not merely of a relationship, but of God's faithfulness. The family shared stories late into the night. Pastor Gregory recounted the first prayer. China shared testimonies from the United Kingdom. The scholarship. The military. The businesses. His salvation. Again and again the same truth emerged. Before China knew he needed help, God had already sent help. Exactly as the prayer declared. 6 months later, family and friends gathered for a wedding. The church was full. People traveled from different cities. Former employees attended. Business associates attended. Church members attended. Even some who remembered China's difficult years came. Many could hardly believe the transformation. As Eleanor walked down the aisle, she felt overwhelming gratitude. Years earlier, she had been rescued from danger. Now she was walking toward the man who had rescued her. A man transformed by God's grace. A man she deeply loved. When the ceremony ended, Pastor Gregory requested permission to say one final prayer. The congregation became silent. China smiled. He already suspected what was coming. The pastor placed a hand on the couple. Then prayed. "Lord, many years ago, I prayed for this young man." Emotion filled his voice. "You answered beyond anything I imagined." Tears flowed throughout the church. The pastor continued. "Today, I ask you to do for this marriage what you did for China. Go ahead of them. Before they know they need help, send help. Before they encounter challenges, prepare solutions. Before they reach closed doors, create openings. And may their lives always point others toward Christ. Amen." The church responded loudly. Amen. As applause filled the sanctuary, China looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at China. Both understood something many people never learn. One act of kindness can change a life. One prayer can change a destiny. And when God decides to write a story, even 12 years is not too long to wait for the ending. That Christmas, as husband and wife, they stood together outside the church beneath the evening sky. Lights decorated the streets. Children sang Christmas songs nearby. Families celebrated. The season felt more meaningful than ever. Because long before China rescued Eleanor, God had already begun rescuing China. And long before either of them understood his plan, he had been preparing a Christmas miracle. The end.